Now, here is Ticky Fullerton on Your Money.
Hello there, I'm Ticky Fullerton, every night bringing you a full hour of the very best in business coverage across the nation and internationally, especially where business and politics meet. Coming up, Sanjeev Gupta on the new race to build cheap electric vehicles. Will the visionary British industrialist help kickstart a new auto manufacturing business in Australia? How serious is the China cyber espionage threat, and how does China deal with growing concerns from Australia? China Money's Network's Nina Xiang talks to Leo Shanahan. And what does the future of the NBN look like under a Labour government? My interview with tech expert Paul Budde. Well, a lot of fuss around EVs this week, electric vehicles, after Labour's energy policy committed to 50% of new cars being electric by 2030. And also that call by Bill Shorten of an 8-minute recharge for a car. Plenty of views around both those things. There is also Labour's new offer of up to $1 billion of support for a new car manufacturing industry with electric vehicles. It's in this fast lane that billionaire industrialist Sanjeev Gupta might find himself as one of the most likely players to start electric vehicle manufacturing in the country. A man after Bill Shorten's own heart, one might say. I spoke with the GFG Alliance Executive Chairman Sanjeev Gupta a little earlier. Sanjeev Gupta, thank you very much for joining me. Things are moving so fast. Let's talk about electric vehicles. What are the chances of you building an electric vehicle in Australia?
I would say pretty high. It's a commitment which I voiced very clearly, and we've been working very hard. And things are moving very quickly now, so I would say very high.
Okay, well, last time people were talking about you investing in an assembly plant, probably the old Holden plant, I think, in Adelaide. Then there was talk about you maybe looking at Victoria. Where would you likely build this, do you think?
So I'm not in a position yet to go into that much detail. But what I can tell you is I'm in the UK next couple of weeks. We're meeting with our partners, Gordon Murray, and things have moved and are moving very quickly. And very soon we'll be announcing what we're doing.
But something in Australia?
Absolutely.
And what do you make of Bill Shorten's announcement about perhaps offering some kind of incentives along the research front? I think it's up to $1 billion he's talking about.
Yeah, I think in general, any seismic shift like this from one industry to another, one way of living, one way of consuming to another, generally can we do some state intervention in terms of pushing it along and really making it happen. So the principle of it I'm not against. So I think it's the fact that they are positive towards it and are even considering supporting it is definitely a good.
Presumably you'd welcome it if they were there to get in.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of talk, Sanjeev, about the cost of electric vehicles, of EVs. Do you think customers should be concerned about the high cost? So
we are actually, it's a very good question, because our model actually is entirely the opposite end of the current spectrum. So we're trying to make a people's car. We're trying to make a car which is not made from traditional means. So this is a technology called iStream, which uses tubular chassis, a tubular frame, composite materials, which dramatically reduces the cost of the car. Yeah. It's not a high performance car. It's not trying to be a high performance car. It's going to try to be a day-to-day car, a city car. Yes, right. Small city car, and it's not made like. We're obviously a very large component supplier to the car industry globally, but this is not made from any of those components. It's almost worth not calling it a car because it's being made it's more like the Formula One cars are made or go-karts are made.
So what's the material it's made out of?
So the frame itself gives it all the strength rather than in a traditional car.
Would it be steel or aluminium?
The frame will probably be steel. It will probably be engineered. It's sort of an engineered construct with high quality steel. But the skin can be anything. Skin can be literally anything. It can vary from steel, aluminium, plastic, different composites. It can even be cardboard, believe it or not. But it's obviously strengthened. They made a 10-ton truck in the UK out of cardboard skin. So it can be anything, and it varies the price of the car based on what you use or materials you use. So it's a very versatile technology. The runs don't have to be big, so it can wear in small runs. So we're very excited about how perfect that is for Australia right now.
If it went ahead, how soon do you think you could put that sort of car on the road in Australia?
I think from the point go is a couple of years, but exactly where point go is something which we have to pin down. So at the moment we're basically, let's say 60% or 50% of the way through that. So it will take us several months before we can actually press go, but we'd be announcing it pretty soon, saying this is what we're doing. And then we do all the work leading up to completion, if you like, or the start point, and then a couple of years.
And do you think it's far-fetched, Labour's claim that they'd like to see 50% new cars being EVs by 2030 in Australia? I
mean, there's plenty of countries. Look at Britain. We have said 2030, no more, right? So there's plenty of countries who are taking even more dramatic measures about transitioning to EVs.
Your other big announcement, every time I see you there's another big announcement, is around banking, Sanjeev. Now you've bought the Diamond Bank subsidiary. It's now going to be called the British Trade Bank. What are you going to do with it?
Actually, the Commonwealth Trade Bank.
The Commonwealth Trade Bank, sorry, and for good reason.
For good reason. It's focused on so again, Australia is very, very at the heart of that, very much at the centre of that. It's focused on Britain looking outward, one way or another, whatever happens back home. It's going to be, Britain will look more towards the international market and redevelop some of its old strengths in trading in countries like Australia. So it's basically looking to partner in that initiative partly and look to get British companies more aligned, more connected with companies in places like Australia.
Yes, and when you say regardless of what happens with Brexit, now what happens if, though, you end up remaining in a customs union?
So I think what's happened in the last year or so in Britain means that whatever happens, Britain will look to strengthen its ties with the rest of the world. So I believe there's a real opportunity for Australia specifically has a great opportunity we already have a great partnership obviously with Britain, or Britain has a great partnership with Australia, but there is a lot more opportunity to build on that. So I think we would like to, given that we are a British and an Australian company now, we would like to participate in that.
And is this bank largely going to be financing your own businesses or beyond that?
No. By regulation, it can't largely finance our own businesses. It will be a small percentage of that. But what we will do is a lot of introductions. So we'll introduce the bank to other clients, other peers,
and it's sort of
customers.
Supply chain financing, trade financing.
It's trade finance. So it's international movement of goods and everything which goes around that, whether it's prepayments, whether it's transactional services, whether it's financing inventory or receivables, all the supply chain finance tools.
Right. Now tell us a bit more about what's going on down at Whyalla and how this transformation, this $600 million transformation program is going. I understand you've got a team in Italy at the moment.
Yes, no, it's very, I mean, this is obviously my main, in terms of all my initiatives, is certainly at the center of it. So I'm very excited about starting to see the next big steps happen. We concluded, as you know, late last year on the mill which is coming from Italy, from Danieli. That's the biggest part of the phase one of the transformation. We have now 3 phases to that transformation. First was the mill and a little bit of improvement on the coal injection system. Second is the caster and extra degassing equipment and so on, and then eventually the hot end. So all 3 are progressing, but the first one is basically at the point where we start now actually implementing it.
And as part of this as well, you've also got your financing side and the possibility of a float here in Australia. I see you've got Stuart Cummins, you've just brought back to Sydney as your Chief Financial Officer now.
Stuart's actually the CFO of the primary business, which is, let's say, the Whyalla business.
Yes.
So he's going to be leading up all that. Right. And Jeff Furtado, who was previously he started in finance in the group, and then he led various businesses, including the recycling business and the distribution business. He's now the CFO of the new the building materials business. Right.
So just remind us again which part of the businesses will be in a possible float this year.
So we're examining various options for all the businesses in terms of how we access capital markets, whether it's equity or debt. We're committed to doing that, and I've stated that previously a bit more explicitly than I can now, but we're definitely committed to those processes, and more will become obvious more.
But there was talk of both a float of the US and some of the Australian businesses. Is that still on the cards? That is certainly being examined,
certainly definitely being heavily examined.
Okay, because the market's there for it in terms of an infrastructure float, you'd think.
No, I mean the country has next couple of decades well laid out in terms of the infrastructure demand, so it's a great space to be in generally.
Yeah, Sanjeev, your Port Power, they're staying in the top 8 at the moment.
Yes, we lost one game, but one more coming up on Saturday. We'll see, hopefully hopefully a better result.
And also for Adelaide, I noticed that there's a Formula E that might get up. What are the chances of that happening? Formula One electric vehicles.
I've had some discussions on that, as was reported. For me, it's very linked to our electric vehicle ambitions. If we succeed in those, which I obviously absolutely intend to, then I think it would make quite a lot of sense to see something like Formula E come back to Adelaide. Something like Formula E come back to Adelaide to replace Formula One, which it once was heart of, obviously.
And so you can see car manufacturing returning to Australia in a significant way.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure it will. Where exactly we have to work out, but if it is Adelaide, then it would make a lot of sense for Formula E to come to Adelaide as well.
Sanjeev Gupta, great to talk. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Coming up after the break, what should we think of China's success in AI technology? Nina Xiang, co-founder of the China Money Network, next.
You're watching Ticky on Your Money. Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. Moving to AI now, and Nina Xiang, a co-founder of China Money Network, an AI-based platform that tracks China's tech investments and innovation, is in Sydney this week, talking opportunities for Australian startups. But China's AI and tech industry generally has been mired in serious scrutiny concerns about spying from Chinese companies on behalf of its government. See the banning of the Huawei from the NBN, for example. Leo Shanahan spoke with Nina Xiang earlier about Chinese AI success, but also the serious trust deficit it faces from the rest of the world.
Nina Xiang, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you're giving a speech tomorrow at the Sydney Tech Hub conference at Sydney Town Hall entitled How Far Ahead is China on AI and why? So tell us why, briefly then.
Okay, sure. I have a very simple formula about how much China is ahead in AI, which is 4S plus 3L. So the 4S stands for scale, speed, state support, and social indifference. So scale is very simple. China is a huge country. China has the largest banking sector, the largest e-commerce sector, the largest car market, the largest EV solar wind market, and naturally its AI sector is going to be huge. So if you look at the number of AI startups, how much money they have raised, and the number of AI papers, the number of AI patents, China is going to be the largest or the second largest in all those categories. Speed. Chinese companies have to move really fast in order to survive in this hyper-competitive market in China. So I can give you a simple example. So for a self-driving startup in China, they can spend only 6 months in order to put together a demo car and put that car on the road to do road testing. So that process will take a lot longer elsewhere. So companies and governments move super fast in China. And then state support. This is very, I guess it's widely known that state support is the strongest around the world for AI in China. And then lastly, social indifference. That just means this perception of the public and the people in China don't care so much about their data privacy, and that gives a lot of leeway for companies in China in order to collect data, to train data, to use data, to improve their AI algorithms is much, much easier. So there is this perception, and to some extent, it's true. So the 4S is really explains the majority of the reasons and drivers why AI has been progressing so rapidly in China.
Okay, so what are you trying to achieve in Australia
then? Well, I think it's a great opportunity for me to be here and to understand the local tech scene in Australia, and also to foster a mutual understanding and also potential cooperations between the two countries. Because Australia has a lot to offer in technology and in artificial intelligence, and China has a lot to offer in this sector as well. China has, the largest potential market. The potential applications of AI technology in China is huge because of the labor force decreasing in China, and because of all these different issues in healthcare, in education, in agriculture, in smart cities. The potential of all those applications in China is enormous, and Australia's got the talent and the technology that can be applied to that huge market and generate really valuable social benefits and economic benefits. And in addition, China got the world's second largest VC market, not to mention government money flowing into the AI sector on the range of hundreds of billions of US dollars. So that kind of capital will be able to nurture Australian technology and talents in AI as well.
Okay, on this point, isn't there a central problem of trust in Chinese companies and by extension the Chinese state at the moment? So obviously the Australian government, along with the New Zealand government, American government and others have banned, for example, Huawei from having a role in government contracts. They're banned from having a role in our national broadband network, basically because they see them as a state entity that will spy on them. How do you get over that, especially in an area like AI, where the potential for intelligence is so enormous?
I see this as a major challenge for Chinese AI companies to expand around the world. I talked to facial recognition companies in China. They're trying to expand overseas, mostly in Asia Pacific region first. So when they go to other countries and they try to sell their product, which is perhaps can be facial recognition, surveillance cameras. And when they sell this kind of products in countries outside of China, the degree of distrust and suspicion and alarm is very high. So this is a very, very important hurdle for all the AI companies in China if they want to expand their business elsewhere. I think there are ways that can be put in place to overcome this issue, both from the Chinese government's angle, from the Chinese company's angle. They can do a lot to make their products and services a lot more transparent. They can provide the necessary information and guarantees. They will have to do whatever that the receiving part of their clients and their government entities in order to tell them our products and services are safe, and we have all these measures A, B, C, D, and these are all the things we'll be doing in order to ensure that. Okay, so on Chinese government state support, another problem with Chinese companies is that it's very unclear who's owning the company. Its ownership is opaque. Even a big company like H&A, it's not clear ultimately who runs that company. Don't you think that this is a serious problem in doing business with Chinese companies when they might think it's a private company, but it's actually a state company? First of all, I think for most of the companies in China, their ownership structure is transparent and clear, especially for public companies. You can clearly see who's their major shareholders. For the recent emerging AI companies, most of those companies are backed by private capital, and there are a lot of state government guidance funds who participate and invest in those companies, but the money is mostly come from private sector. So you have to understand how the government funds work in China. They provide the seed capital to a VC fund who have to raise potentially another 80% of the capital from the private markets. So that means the majority of the money come from the private markets.
So they're always going to owe the state a percentage of their income, though?
Well, like I say, so this is interesting because initially Chinese government put money together and invest in companies directly, and later they found out that method is not appropriate. So now they have changed the method. So what they do is now the government would allocate the capital to a fund. So they're not directly investing in companies at all. They are allocating seed capital to a fund, and the fund would raise additional majority of the fund's capital from private markets.
Okay.
So that fund will then invest in companies. So that means government is not holding any direct ownership in all the in the private companies that all these VC funds are putting money into.
In the last few years, we've seen a restriction of capital flow outside of China for private companies. This has got to be a problem for emerging tech companies, AI companies in China, in that it's harder for them to invest in Australia when capital is restricted.
Can you explain a little bit about what kind of restriction are you talking about?
Well, in private investment. So, for example, if you go down to Circular Quay in Sydney, there are buildings that are no longer being built by large Chinese companies because the capital is being restricted for those buildings.
Capital, like outbound investment capital
outbound
from
investment
China.
capital, yeah.
Okay. Well, if you're talking about this relating to AI companies or investors, well, so like a lot of the investors in China, if you're talking about VC funds, if they're US dollar funds, they got their money from traditional institutional investors elsewhere, like in Europe, in North America, in Australia. They got, traditional LPs like pension funds, endowment funds. So their LP base is very international, and their fund mandate depends on specific funds. It can be Asia Pac, it can be just China. So it depends on their mandate. And if their mandate is Asia Pac, there's no problem for them to invest outside of China. And particularly when you consider their fund probably have an offshore structure.
Okay, and a final question. What about patent issues and forced technology transfer? That's a big issue in the global trade war at the moment between the US and China. Surely there's a serious issue with AI companies and other tech companies with this forced technology transfer for foreign companies to do business in China.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like to say for forced technology transfer, China has really haven't achieved a lot on forced technology transfer. I'll tell you a couple examples. So in industrial robotics, for example, Chinese companies, local Chinese companies can only supply about 10 to 15% of demand in China for the key parts for industrial robots. So that includes controllers, that includes servo motors. Those are the key parts for industrial robots. And Chinese companies can only meet the tiny portion, with the majority, 85 to 90% of those still relying on imports. Why? Because Chinese companies don't have the core technology. And on another aspect, on chips, for example, chips industry, as you know, semiconductor in China is still largely dependent on imports because the local companies still lack core patents and core competences. So if you're talking about, hey, you have been forcing all these companies to transfer technology, number one, all those companies in the past have agreed to joint venture structure, not only because the government required it, and also because they have find a way where they find acceptable to them to make the commercial decision to form a joint venture with a Chinese local company. And in that process, you also see how the foreign company protect their IP and only give the portion of outdated technology to Chinese local partners.
After the break, what will the future of the NBN be like under a Labour government? We'll hear from telco expert Paul Budde next.
This is TICKY on Your Money, covering the big business stories.
Welcome back. The NBN was given not really very much attention in the budget, but Labour has since promised a careful, independent review of the massive government infrastructure project that just about everybody loves to whinge about, don't they? From end customers to all the telcos being squeezed by high wholesale costs. Telecommunications analyst Paul Budde, for one, welcomes the review. I asked him how he saw the future of the NBN. Paul Paul Budde, thanks for joining me. Let's start with Labour's response to the budget, really, and its plans for the NBN.
Yeah, I think, it's a realistic way forward. It would be ridiculous to now say when the NBN is rolled out for 80%, to say now throw it away again and start again. That would be ridiculous. So, the reality is, despite the fact that we've got a second-rate network, that's what we have now, and that's as good as it gets at the moment.
Well, Stephen Conroy was a huge part of it, of course. I mean, they could hardly walk back from that.
Yeah, no, so, when you go back to 2007, 2009, which is now a decade ago, then at that point in time, fibre to the home was the plan. And, yes, it would have blown out. There would have been more money involved in. There would have been delays as well. But look at the delays that we get now. But then, in any case, we would have had a fibre to the home network, let's say, 2 years later, 3 years later, $20 billion more, $60 billion altogether, Now we have to invest another $30 to $40 billion, over the next decade to get the network that we eventually will get, So in that respect, it's a situation that we've got what we have now, and now build on that and start looking, what does it cost, what's the best possible way to move forward to this nirvana of fibre to the home or fibre to the curb.
All right. We're a long way from writing this baby down. Obviously, the government doesn't want to write it down. Do you think Labour, if they came into power, would actually write it down?
I think there have to be some sort of a write down. I mean, it won't be called a write down, it will be called something different, to smooth it over.
Revaluation,
revaluation, whatever,
But isn't that, I mean, that's what obviously you've been calling for, but doesn't that drive the ability to charge less in terms of NBN fulfilling its model? Isn't that the key to the telco providers being able to offer services competitively?
Yeah, what we already start seeing happening, some of the other proposals from Labour are aimed at the lower end of the market, and one of the things is it has to be an affordable package. That means lower profits, lower return on investment for NBN Co. So you start seeing that anything that you do in the NBN in that sort of a situation will already lower the financial position of the NBN Co, where it's already in. But to be honest, we don't know exactly what the financial situation is. So that's why Labour is asking for a total review, including the financial situation. And to be honest, it makes sense that you first need that information before you then start talking down. Do we need a write down? Do we need it across the board? Do we need it only for the fibre to the node? Then the other thing what they're trialing is upgrading fibre to the node to fibre to the curb, so you get a bit of an idea what's going to happen with the 2-3 million that are on this poor network. How much is it going to cost to move that forward? That, of course, is important, again, in the whole financial picture that you want to create. So I think that's...
And you're suggesting that you could actually offer some of these services for free, and that would make economic sense?
Yes, I mean, if everybody talks about how important it is to be connected, and that's also for simple things like finding jobs, for healthcare, for education, for social services. So the people that are on the bottom end of our society, they also need access to it. And it's far more efficient and effective if those people can access services online. You don't have all the staff necessary with paperwork, to look after these people. So it starts making sense to make that freely available. You see that already happening in some of the Scandinavian countries, where the bottom end of the market basically gets free access. And I think in a couple of years' time, when we have this interview again, we will start seeing things like that happening in Australia as well.
And Paul, what do you make of Alan New, head of Optus's comments that really the NBN is letting us down, it's holding Australia back, and that 5G networks globally are really going to have to pick up the slack?
I totally agree that it's letting us down. I totally agree that we've got a second-rate network, and 5G could definitely have a role to play. But the reality is, the economic reality is, that a fixed network is always cheaper in mass markets. So if you start talking about cities, towns, then a fixed network is economically always far more efficient, far more cost effective than a wireless network. That's not to say that there are opportunities for 5G on the edges of the network. We already hear that NBN, we heard that today, that NBN Co has serious problems with its wireless network at the moment. It's underperforming. Can 5G help? We don't know, because there are no 5G networks yet. So before you can actually make promises like that, let's test it. Let's have these things going. That takes time, The millimeter wave is not yet available. It takes 2, 3, 4 years to actually get the 5G sort of element going. By that time, 5 years further on the fixed network, we will start seeing fiber to the curb, fiber to the home, and the whole economic sense of a larger part of the network being served by 5G will be less.
And what do you make of my colleague at the Australian, Chris Griffith's story the other day, where he's saying that there are some companies, I think the UK's OneWeb, SpaceX's Starlink, which are looking at putting up a constellation, if you will, of mini satellites about the size of toasters, about 500 k's up, to actually be very useful maybe for some of the regions that are hard to get to, but indeed could threaten the NBN's business model as well.
No, I totally don't agree with that. I've been in the business for 30 years. I've seen at least a dozen of that sort of proposals over the years, going back 20 years or something like that.
So 2021, 2022, you can't see that happening?
No way. It's far too expensive. Where it works in areas like Africa or parts of remote areas in the world, but the remote part of Australia is far too small to have a cost-effective way of having hundreds of these satellites up just to serve as part of the inland of Australia. So it doesn't make economic sense to do things like that. Satellite will have a role to play, absolutely. Are the current satellites the ones that will serve us in 10 years' time? Most likely not. So will there be new satellites coming up? Yes, absolutely. Could it be some of these examples? Possible. But then you start talking about 5% of the market in remote areas. It won't serve cities, it won't serve towns and things like that.
Finally, as a customer, do you think the average Australian's cost of telecommunications, access to the internet and the service will go up or down in the next 12 months?
It has to go down. That's what's happening everywhere in the world. Or going down.
Cost going down.
Cost going down, or what you see, for the same money, you get far better services and more capacity, where you can download movies and whatever you want to do. So, most likely they will try to keep the money that they get from you, but give you, better. And that's what you see if you look back over the last 10 years in the mobile network, that basically has happened. So it is impossible, that you have one of the countries in the world, being Australia, against the rest of the world, where everywhere the prices are going down, in Australia the prices are going up. We've got this problem because we've got a second-rate network, and the government will have to start making a decision about it. And as we've discussed before, that could well be a write down, in order to make sure that we keep competitive with other broadband services around the world.
Paul Budde, great to get your insights. Thanks.
My pleasure.
Sudan has not really been much on Australia's radar, but the African nation, with many similarities to our own population size, climate and industries, wants to change that. This week, the first major trade delegation of Sudanese business leaders has been over in Australia, talking to leaders here in agriculture and mining, hoping to drum up investment in Sudan. I was joined earlier by Sudan's ambassador to Australia, Dr. Ibrahim Baroudi. Dr. Ibrahim Baroudi, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
You've got quite a big delegation down here. Is this the first major delegation in recent times to come to Australia?
Yes, even it's the first in the history of our relation with Australia. It's the first biggest delegation of business people to come down to Australia.
What is the economic opportunity, the trade opportunity?
Australia, it's very known of its high level of agricultural sector, and Sudan also is known by its very huge potential in agriculture. So it's going without saying that the two countries need to cooperate. So this is what we are trying to do, to put the people concerned in these sectors together, to get benefit of the huge opportunities they have.
So you've got business leaders from Sudanese agricultural companies meeting business leaders today from Australian companies. And what's the opportunity, I suppose, for Australian export? Is that knowledge export in agriculture? Or?
Generally speaking, that Sudan is a very rich country in agricultural resources. and it needs to promote this sector. And Australia is advanced country in agriculture, and there is a big need for Sudan to get benefit of the technology and researches and
yes, because I think 80% of the Sudanese are employed in agriculture, some very high number anyway.
Yeah, it's not 80, it's more than 70% of the people who are working in the agriculture sector in Sudan.
And you've got the Nile running right through.
Yeah, the Nile is crossing the country from the south to north.
South to north, but you've also, like Australia, got a lot of arid land, so presumably drought resistance and tolerance is very important.
We have a lot of similarities with Australia. That's why I believe that we have a lot of things to do together in this sector.
In terms of investment, foreign investment in the country, there's quite a lot of Chinese investment, would you say, already?
Yes. The Chinese, one of the great investors in Sudan. They came in early 90s.
Yeah, and what are they primarily?
But they are mainly in the sector of oil. Yeah. They did a lot for the exploration of oil in Sudan.
Right.
Yeah. But for me personally, I think we have a lot of things to do with Australia in the sector of agriculture and mining, because
gold.
Yeah, Sudan is the second producing gold country in Africa.
Yes.
So, and Australia, of course, one of the leading producers of gold in the world.
Right. Now, if you were an Australian business looking to invest in a country like Sudan, one of the things that would come up straight away is where you sit on the ease of doing business in the world and the corruption index. And you rank close to the bottom in both of those.
Yeah, we have some difficulties in this regard, but we are not the only country with these difficulties. We are a developing country. We have our difficulties and challenges. And we suffered for 20 years of the sanctions imposed by the United States of America on Sudan. So this played a very bad role in developing the agriculture and economy of the Sudan. So we are trying to struggle against the corruption, and these problems are there, but we are doing our best to eliminate any obstacles to have investors from other countries like Australia.
Yes. Yeah. And of course then there's the sovereign risk as well. Your President Omar al-Bashir, he's putting down at the moment protesters. I think quite 14 anti-government protesters. The reports were killed in a protest just in the last few days. What about the sovereign risk as well for the country?
This is a very short-term crisis.
Right.
Because Sudan generally is a very calm country, and the people are very peaceful people. And there are some frustrations and demonstrations, but they are obtained, and the government is trying to solve the problems that the people demonstrate for.
Yes.
So I think this will be resolved in the following few days.
Right, okay. And what size of transactions of investments are we talking about, Dr. Baroudi?
We have invited about 50 big companies from Sudan for this forum.
Yes.
And some of them are dealing already with the Australian counterparts. And we are waiting for about $500 million to be the volume of the exchange between Sudan and Australia for the short future. In
terms of cross-investment in the two countries.
Yeah, yes.
All right. Well, it's the first of many, I'm sure, but it's very nice to have them in the country, and I hope we can both prosper. So, Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
After the break, one of the super funds trying to engage millennials with superannuation. Joshua Wilson, CEO of Grow Super, will join me next.
Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. Well, over 100,000 union protesters sent Melbourne streets into lockdown yesterday as workers campaigned to change the rules. Victoria's Premier was centre stage at the event, seeking an end to the Morrison government.
The streets of Melbourne, once again, a sea of union flags and banners.
I think Melbourne is a union town. So when I say union, you say power. Union! Union! Union!
Outside Trades Hall, a crowd of well over 100,000 angry unionists gathered to have their voices heard in what's one of Australia's biggest ever union rallies.
When do we want it? Now!
You don't get that many people in the streets if there's not a problem. And there is a massive problem in our workplaces.
Not just men and women, children too were brought along to the politically charged rally. Even the Victorian Premier was present, proud to take centre stage in front of Labor's core.
I think a fair go, properly funding schools, properly funding hospitals is worth everything.
Parts of the CBD were locked down, tram services were disrupted and traffic rerouted as the rally marched down major streets all the way down to Parliament. While the message was to change the rules,
we want to make sure there's laws in place that make sure that workers can bargain to get wage increases and that we have a living wage in the system so that workers don't live in poverty if they're working.
It's clear the goal is to change the government.
We want radical change, so we're asking for Scott Morrison to call an election today because it's time for him to go.
While this rally might be over, it's not the last we'll see of the protesters, with unions vowing to take the fight to marginal seats over the course of the election.
Patrick Murrell, Sky News, Melbourne.
Well, let's finish with a bit of superannuation now, and one newish group making a play for Gen Y and Gen Z is Grow Super. CEO of Grow Super, Josh Wilson, joins me now. Josh, welcome. How long have you been going? A few years now.
Yeah, about 2.5 years since we started the company and 2 years since we've been in market.
And how big are you now?
Decent enough considering our marketing budget. So we're probably sitting just short of about 60 million in funds under management.
Right.
And about 15,000 users.
Okay, and the idea is you're trying to pull in these young people who are an awfully long way from retirement. How do you do that?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things that we've tried to do is use age as a metric, but we've also tried to, I guess, provide a product and a service that helps anyone, you know, from any social group, any age group, achieve a improved and ideal financial outcome in retirement.
They've got to be able to work an app, though, don't they?
They do, yes, app or a website. But I think, you know, one of the big things that you have to do when you're trying to have a meaningful kind of interaction with, I think, anyone in relation to their superannuation is contextualise. You know, I think that it's obvious that there are definitely things that could be improved in achieving kind of ideal financial outcomes for people. And there, I guess, are some problems with the system and how it's operating at the moment in you know, not maximising the benefit that as an industry we can create for a member.
This is in the accumulation phase.
In the accumulation phase,
because that was hauled out, obviously, during the Hayne Royal Commission, particularly the retail funds, I think, got a bloody nose for their high costs.
Yep.
But you, as a new fund, your costs aren't insignificant, are they? Because you're a new fund.
No, they're not. I think, you know, our costs are comparable, I would say, with the majority of funds that sit out there. So it's a flat 95 basis point fee before insurance, and then $1.50 a week admin fee pre-GST as well. And then the insurance is optional, which you can turn on and off in the app. So, you know, it's still, I guess, underneath that 100 basis point mark, which seems to be the benchmark for now, but I think there'll be inevitable contraction in fees.
And what do you make of this move to have just one default fund? What's that going to do to your opportunity to grow?
Look, it's interesting. I mean, that won't particularly affect us because none of our members are default. So everyone that has actually joined Grow has made a choice. And if you look at that default system, whilst you have to nominate one default fund, you can only have the one default fund.
Yeah, and that's unlikely to be a little startup like Grow? Or
look, I would imagine at this point in time it is unlikely, and probably justifiably so. I think, you know, there's a range of other services that an incumbent fund can provide to an employer, and I think a lot of the profit to member funds are well positioned, I guess, to deliver on their philosophical alignments with a lot of the default arrangements that they have.
Yeah, got it.
But at the same time, there's definitely things that can be done to improve the member experience and drive better outcomes.
And Joshua, interesting today, I noticed in the Fin that Spaceship, one of your major competitors, now the founder there, Paul Bennett, has actually withdrawn his application for an APRA licence to operate his own super fund, essentially. Now, where do you sit? Do you have a licence?
Yes, so we have our own RSE. We acquired that RSE from our trustee towards the back end of last year.
Right.
While still maintaining the outsourced trustee
right, because that presumably was what Spaceship's situation would have been as well.
I believe they were going for the full thing. And look, I think in the environment that we're operating out here, I can imagine it would be quite a stringent and rigorous process, which it should be to go through. I understand why they wanted to have that capability in the first place, but I can also understand why perhaps with where things sit internally and externally for them, it may not have been the right time to go through
So the question for you, and indeed for them, is why, as a young person, would I put my money with you if you don't have the skills to choose investments on my behalf and act hopefully to really grow my investment?
Yeah, look, I think, for our model, it's always been delivering on things that we're actually really, really good at. So we outsource the investment selection to, a highly regarded Nobel Prize winning fund manager. We believe that they've probably got a slightly superior qualification to
And they're doing all right for you so far?
Yeah, they actually are. They had outstanding returns last year. And investing is a long game, so it's important. We believe in the approach that Dimensional actually take with their investment strategy, and so we feel that over the long run, the investment returns for our members are going to be comparable, if not equal and better to any other fund that sits out there. And we'll focus on delivering a holistic member experience that takes into account not just the super component, but tries to bring in, a more meaningful and deeper picture to make sure that, those members are retiring in the most optimum fashion.
Yes. Yeah. Now, you're moving into a slightly different business as well?
Yes, so, I think one of the big things for us that we've realised pretty early on is that there's certain, impediments in being able to do things that are truly innovative in that customer experience and delivery with the current administration model. There's a lot of legacy complexity from an operational and a technical kind of perspective that do make it difficult to really do anything that's particularly innovative, both at the product level but also the customer experience level. So we decided that we were going to build our own, superannuation, accum, pension and defined benefit administration capability, and we've done that. That's called Tina, named after Tina Arena because it's on the blockchain.
Very popular girl she is.
Yes, that's right. And her song Chains. And that's really allowing us to unpack a huge amount of capability there to start bringing value propositions to market that I think are actually going to be unique.
What sort of, can I push you a bit on this?
You can. Look, I think there's a number of things, both from a customer experience perspective, but also from kind of a core product perspective that have not been, done before. Even the concept, a very basic example, the concept of pool trusts in superannuation as the predominant kind of investment structure for most funds. Whilst there are some benefits there, there's definite and obvious tangible benefits that one could generate for a member if you're running a separately managed account structure, because you can optimise the tax position, you can combine that with a whole bunch of tax configurability to minimise kind of taxing outcomes and consequences, and I guess have a more unique view of that individual member's world. And one of the, again, kind of impingements on that has been the cost and the complexity of administering that in a largely manual system. We're able to automate a lot of that So that's one example of something that we, you know, our new that master fund that we have acquired, that we've launched, which is now live on TINA for a pilot group, is running an SMA structure as opposed to a pooled structure. So that's just one example, but you know, at the product level, and then of course because it's API driven, it's a lot more modular in what you can plug in and out of that. So I think you can start creating some really compelling value propositions.
And what about marketing?
Marketing?
So you've got a great brand, Grow Super.
Yep.
I mean, not much wrong with that.
No. Oh, look, marketing is an interesting one. You know, as I was saying at the start of our conversation, there's a real challenge in contextualising for someone that you've got a solution to a problem that they didn't know they had, because the first thing you've got to do is actually
tell them they've got a problem.
And you know, if we're doing our job right, at the end of the day, we want to be encouraging people to make an informed decision. So if we can alert you to the fact that you've got a problem, you know, as much as we'd love you to just sign up with Grow straight away, it's actually a good thing if you actually take that kind of road to Damascus moment and then use that to research.
Easier if the compulsory amount goes up to 15%? Because I mean, 15% is quite a lot of a missing wage packet, don't you think?
It is. I think there's still probably a little bit of a problem that a lot of people still see it as a tax as opposed to a saving, and I think there's been at least some anecdotal feedback that until that amount in your accum account is equal to what you earn in a year, most people still perceive it as a tax. It's not until it's a substantial amount that people really start to engage with it. And so I think you're always going to have walls and barriers that you're going to have to overcome to get people to, again, contextualise it. And I think context is the biggest thing that you can try and do when you're having that conversation.
Yeah. And what platforms do you use? What sort of advertising do you go through?
Look, there's nothing too crazy with it. You know, given that we do tend to pick up a cohort that is in that under 35 bracket, a lot of what we do is in your social media space.
Sure.
You know, there's nothing too crazy about what we do.
Have you got any targets? Any targets for growth?
Look, we've got some strategic partnerships that we're actually doing that we'll look to announce over the kind of next couple of months that we think are going to grow that fund in a much different way and a much more targeted way with some niche kind of value propositions. You know, I think once they're revealed, that will make a lot more sense.
Right, watch this space.
Yes.
Right, come back on and tell us about them. Joshua Wilson, thank you very much. Well, that's all for the show tonight. Tomorrow night, I'll be presenting Ticky live from Adelaide for the Business Council of Australia's Strong Australia event. Thanks for your company.